Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel at War, an update on day 593rd of the war, which started on October the 7th, 2023, with the horrific attack and massacre by Hamas on Israel's southern district, the Negev. And there are still 58 hostages in Hamas captivity. 20 of them are presumed alive. The others are probably, regretfully, dead already. With us today are two reserve brigadier generals in the Israeli Defense Forces, Amnon Sofrin, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly with the Directorate of Military Intelligence and as the Intelligence Division Chief of Mossad. Amnon, welcome.
Morning, Amir.
Thank you. And again, Brigadier General Relik Shafir of the Israeli Air Force, a former fighter pilot and a base commander, one of the senior leaders of the Israeli Air Force. General Sofrin, as you probably remember, right after the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, Secretary of State Dean Rusk said that the confrontation, which lasted 13 days at the time, ended when the other guy blinked. The other guy meaning the Soviet leader Khrushchev. As we are still fighting in Gaza, almost 20 months to the day, is the Hamas leadership, if we still know of one, if we still can distinguish between the political leaders of Hamas abroad and the military or terrorist leaders of Hamas within Gaza, are they going to blink? And if so, when?
First of all, there is a big difference between the political wing of Hamas or political leaders of Hamas who are living abroad and don't really are engaged in what happens in Gaza and don't feel the pressure, don't feel the air bombardment, the artillery, the tanks, and everything else. And they can make up their own decisions independently in a very cool atmosphere without interfering with the feeling the hot pressure under the feet. On the other hand, we have still people in Gaza. I don't really know who is controlling now the military wing of Hamas in Gaza, but still, as we know right now, there are about 20,000 people, including new recruitees, not very skilled by activating weapon systems and so on, but nevertheless they are there and they are willing to fight. And they have all the ambitions to go on fighting. And they have, of course, the biggest card on earth, the 58 people that you mentioned just before, that are under the captivity. And this is the card they're playing with against Israel. Now, of course, they take advantage of what we call the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the fact that the whole world is now applying pressure on Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza, and to calls from Europe mainly to stop the war immediately, including threatening to apply sanctions on Israel if they don't stop the war and stop killing, as they refer to that, innocent people in Gaza. And therefore, they have still leverage and they can go on fighting. And they don't blink right now. And the fact that they are willing to go to some arrangement, or Israel wants to go into partly apply what we call the Witkoff plan of exchanging prisoners, meaning releasing the hostages that are being abducted into Gaza in exchange for stopping the war or ceasing the fire, and applying the total arrangement of what will be the end of this war. And Hamas says, no, we want only to discuss the full agreement. That means we will release all the people, you will stop the war, you will get out of Gaza, we will stay here, and this is our provision right now.
But General Sofrin, let's assume that the Hamas leadership accepts the Israeli demands and essentially gives up. And they announce, much like the Japanese emperor in August of 1945, that the war is over, they have surrendered. Will the rank and file, will those 20,000 armed youth in the tunnels and in the ruins of Gaza, will they obey the chain of command, or will they split and go on fighting? Guerrilla, terror.
I believe that they won't apply to such an order, and I don't know for sure who is going to give such an order, in case this will be the scenario. But nevertheless, I believe that at least part of them will go on fighting and try to cause damage to the IDF people as much as they can. And if we are going to apply what we call the full arrangement, Israel is not willing to leave Gaza totally. We created what we call a buffer zone of about a depth of kilometer and more, or even more, into the area of Gaza, meaning differing from Gaza to the Israeli border, which is empty totally, and what we call without ruins, without houses, without vegetation, and everything else. And this will be what we call a security zone, and nobody can get in. And if he's going to get in, he's going to be probably shot as an infiltrator. So if we are going to stay in Gaza, and I believe that this will be the plan, at least for the coming months, in case this arrangement will be applied, they will still go on fighting, at least part of them.
So in Hebrew, you pronounce perimeter as kilometer. This is, if one were to translate the geography of the Gaza Strip into concrete terms.
Yeah, I believe that this is the depth. At least that was what was announced. I believe that in some places there were adjustments, even more, even less. I don't really know exactly to map it, but the ratio is about the buffer zone for perimeter of 1 kilometer of what we call empty area that will be controlled by the IDF from both sides, from the side of Gaza, from the Israeli side of the border, and nobody can get in.
General Shafir, the Israeli Air Force has conducted several strikes in Yemen against the Houthis. These are probably good exercises if the Air Force intends to go elsewhere on a similar range of some 2,000 kilometers, not necessarily south, perhaps east. But how do you view the relative success or failure of these missions, not kinetically by hitting the targets, but by imposing Israel's will on the Houthis? Because this Ansar Allah tribe in Yemen persists in trying to launch missiles and drones at Israel, not always successfully, but enough to cause a nuisance. And now, in retaliation for the port of Hodeidah and two other lesser ports being struck by Israel, it is threatening to lay siege on the port of Haifa, Israel's biggest. So, to sum it up, how successful has the Air Force been in its offensive operations?
Now, before we get into this, let me just make a small correction on the previous discussion on Dean Rusk and the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a secret agreement that half a year after the Soviets will withdraw from Cuba, the Americans will remove the Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey. So the question of who blinked first remains in question to date. And getting back to our story here, the Israeli attacks were very successful in what they meant to do is to stop the ability of the Houthis to import goods into their three ports. That means fuel, munition, even food, and therefore they're reduced to I would say a lower level of living, which unfortunately in that area of the world they're able to sustain for quite a while. Now the Houthis have been planning on using these their tactics for many years, almost 10 years since they came into power in that area of Yemen, and have hid their missiles and drones in underground shelters or places that are difficult for us to find, as well as the U.S. Navy, who dropped quite a few bombs there, but without information and intelligence to the whereabouts of their leaders and their missiles. Even though the Air Force can hit whatever it means to, without that knowledge, they will be able to shoot a missile every now and then and maintain that nuisance for quite a while. We haven't maintained any intelligence or real intelligence in the Houthi area, and neither have the Americans. And so they have the upper hand in the sense that they can come out of hiding as a guerrilla force, but the guerrillas don't just shoot RPGs or small arms, but now can shoot a 2,000-kilometer missile, which although it will not cause much damage as the anti-ballistic missiles, the Arrow and the THAAD, can shoot them down quite easily, but they're causing a nuisance in the fact that many airlines have stopped flying to Israel, and that creates a difficulty for Israel, and we're not able to stop these nuisance fires in any easy way or any short time, and we'll either have to live with it or go to the Iranians and threaten them to stop the firing or end the war in Gaza. All these options are on the table, not very good as far as we're concerned with the Houthis. I guess that in the next few weeks, we will have to live with that nuisance.
But ever since the late 1960s, if not earlier, the Air Force has gotten the bigger slice of the defense budget, or at least the military budget in Israel. Perhaps you would have been better to give some of it to the Navy so that you would have an aircraft carrier able to break open the siege on Bab el-Mandeb, so that shipping to Israel, to the port of Eilat or through the Suez Canal to Haifa and Ashdod could go through, because the Houthis have been successful in blocking shipping to Israel from Asia.
Yes, but shipping from Asia into Eilat is not a strategic threat. It's a tactical threat rather than anything else. It doesn't stop the flow of goods, fuel, food, or anything else. It may make importing cars from Japan or Korea a longer voyage going around Africa, but not much more than that. It's a nuisance for the Egyptians, by the way, rather than the Israelis, because they're suffering by the fact that the Suez Canal is used less, and therefore their revenue is dropped quite a lot. So the question is, how much do you focus on the peripheral threats rather than the main threat, Israel being itself not that much larger than an aircraft carrier, and therefore the Air Force can strike in different areas and look at what had happened in the past year and a half. we were able to subdue the Hezbollah almost entirely, depending on the Air Force, subdue the Iranians, of course, with the help of the United States and Great Britain, but mostly by the Israeli Air Force, and actually reduce Hamas into a small guerrilla force, and not to talk of what happened in Syria. So the main threats to Israel have changed dramatically since in the last year and a half, mainly due to the Air Force being able to project its power in the Middle East. And if our politicians play it well, it will stay that way for quite a while.
Spoken like a true fighter jock, you earned a flyby over your residence, and, as you said, an unsinkable aircraft carrier. But Dr. Sofrin, please shed your uniform and wear your academic gown for a moment. Building on what Relik Shafir just said about the periphery as against the core of Israeli defense interests and preparations, it turns out that one must prioritize. Israel has always written and practiced contingencies against the most serious threats. Philosophically, something must be lower on the list, and this is exactly what the enemies have prepared for, both in what we just mentioned, the Bab el-Mandeb closure, as well as the Hamas offensive against Israel. Now, eventually this war will end, and the Israeli Defense Forces will try to rehabilitate their build-up, their look towards the future. Do you have any early lessons learned regarding how Israel can avoid such failures and prepare for the next contingency, the next turn of events?
First of all, I believe that the main lesson that we learn right now is that we have to fight what we call irregular armed forces, just like Hamas or Hezbollah or anyone else, or even the Houthis are not really what we call an organized armed forces. Let's say. Second, of course, we have to strengthen the abilities of our Air Force to go and act for a long time, not only to hit and get back to Yemen or to any other place eastern of Israel. And that means that I believe that capacity building is very essential right now. And I believe this is what we call the main ability of Israel to react against what we call faraway threats out of the border of Syria. On top of that, I think that the ground forces should be organized differently, just like they acted right now during this war, meaning to organize totally the ground forces as what we call combined brigades, and not brigades that are organized only for wartime, but what we call a permanent structure of that kind. The next issue is what we call intelligence effort, which means that we have to go into two dimensions. The first one is to improve our capability to give up early warning indications, and not to rely on the fact that we will get what we call the golden idea, just like we had on October 6, 1973, October 5, 1973. And in this case, we didn't we waited for something else to come, or something like that to come. We didn't connect the dot, and we were totally surprised. And this is the second time during the history of the 50 last years that we were surprised by what we call failing to give the early warning to the IDF, to the state of Israel, and the results, of course, were catastrophic. And the second level is what we call on the tactical level, on the fighting unit. Each unit should have its own capacity to produce its own intelligence, to gather its own intelligence, to process it very quickly, using what we call the most advanced tools and methods that we have right now. And this will enable each one of the units to act what we call carefully and to plan very carefully and to avoid, of course, many surprises and less casualties to our side. And I think that
Amnon, can you please elaborate on what you meant by combined brigades? Because traditionally, of course, infantry grows its own troops. You yourself were an infantryman wounded in combat, and usually under the Israeli system, a rifleman then becomes a squad leader, a platoon leader, a company commander, and so on. And the brigade is composed of battalions of the same branch. What you suggest is that your old Golani infantry brigade should have an artillery battalion, an engineer battalion, an intelligence unit, but isn't that going to hurt the professionalism of the branch?
I think that on the highest level of brigade commander and above, you should be able to control all what we call different kinds of fighting units under your control. And that means to be an expert on each one of them, or to be able to combine all of them together. Now look at what happened during this war. We fought in Gaza and in Lebanon in what we call combined units. For example, Golani Brigade had only 1 or 2 battalions of its own, had an armored battalion, artillery battalion, engineering, intelligence, and so on. Now, if you fight like that on wartime, if you don't prepare it in advance during what we call peacetime or between the wars, and train all the time together, and each one will know each other perfectly, and not meet for the first time during what we call the planning action before getting into the battle, only then we can have what we call very successful efforts and not combine what we call ad hoc for a certain battle.
General Shafir, taking what General Sofrin said regarding the ground forces and trying to apply it to your own branch, to the Air Force, you mentioned the closure of the Ben Gurion Airport and then the cancellation of flights out of it and into it, which means that the air and missile defense, at least on one crucial moment, failed. And the question is, given that fighter pilots are always top of the heap in the Air Force and would naturally try to get more assets for the manned aircraft rather than to drones or to air defense, should there be a revision of this tradition when the Israeli Air Force builds itself towards the future? And of course, it has to do it under the framework of the entire IDF and the Ministry of Defense.
Well, definitely there should be a different mix. Some more combat helicopters to be able to respond to a non-conventional attack. As we saw, Hamas had used the fact that they knew that if they can get through the border with Israel within 10 or 15 minutes into the army bases in the settlements or kibbutzim along the border, they will disappear within and render the Air Force useless, so to speak, because from the air you cannot be part of an ongoing close-range battle. Certainly not with vegetation that doesn't allow you to get a good look at what you're shooting at. So this can be overcome somewhat by helicopters, fighter helicopters. That will probably make a small change. Another change that probably would be coming is missiles that can immediately be shot at the enemy even without precise intelligence, but to pre-designed targets as we are fired upon. Because today, when we are fired by the Houthis or maybe even the Iranians, it takes a few hours at least for the Air Force to respond. But if the other side knows that immediately as they fire their missiles, there are missiles that are being fired at predestined areas. For instance, the island of Harj in the Hormuz Straits, which houses a lot of the fuel industry of Iran. So they know that as their missiles are in the air, whether they'll be shot down or not, they will immediately, within minutes, have a retaliation hitting certain areas, known areas. These kind of answers would widen the thwarting capability of Israel, whereas the real firepower will always be with fighters in the air that can carry the large munitions, the big missiles, and the interdiction capability of those weapons. But the immediate response that is really not available on a conventional scale would probably be some of the things that will be looked at. Must give some credit to the previous defense minister, Lieberman, who thought of this quite a few years ago, maybe not the way he envisioned it, but certainly an immediate retaliation is wanted at this time.
And then we will have the old debate over whether we should keep these surprises for the real war or unleash them between wars, and then the enemy might prepare some defensive measures. This is an ongoing debate. Thank you very much, both of you, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, Brigadier General in the Air Force in the Reserve, Relik Shafir. This has been Israel at War, an update from TV7 in Jerusalem. For the time being, until tomorrow, shalom from Jerusalem.